Lena sat at her cluttered desk, staring at the empty mug that had once been filled with coffee, then regret. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to start the next report, but her mind was somewhere else. Somewhere much less mundane. She could hear the whirring of her desktop fan in the corner, a quiet reminder of how trapped she felt in this dingy, one-room apartment. Just a week ago, she'd been the brilliant, tech-savvy CEO of a tiny but promising startup, Futura Tech. Now, she was the defeated employee of some faceless corporation, her last attempt at building something revolutionary crushed by a botched prototype and an investor who'd promised the world and delivered nothing. She rubbed her eyes, wishing for a distraction, and the bright blue light from her computer screen caught her attention. Another email from Futura Tech's legal team, reminding her that they were legally severing ties and invoking the non-compete clause. Wonderful. She hated lawyers almost as much as she hated feeling like a failure. The apartment was too quiet. Too small. Lena's gaze darted around the room, filled with half-empty bookshelves, old pizza boxes, and a single plant that looked like it was just on the edge of surviving. She had meant to water it 3 days ago. That wasn't going to happen now. At that moment, a knock at the door broke through her haze. She groaned, already knowing who it was. Mrs. Jensen from down the hall. The neighborhood watch member who seemed to think everyone was a potential threat to the building's peace. Lena stood up, wiping a bit of leftover pizza sauce off her shirt. Opening the door, she was greeted by a small, hunched woman wearing an old cardigan that looked more suited for a Victorian grandmother than a 21st-century apartment building. "Lena, dear," Mrs. Jensen said in a tone that was much too sweet, "I noticed you haven't been outside much lately. Perhaps you should get some fresh air? You know, walk around. It's good for your health." "Yeah," Lena said, non-committal. "Thanks, Mrs. Jensen, but I'm fine." The old woman's eyes narrowed for a moment, scanning Lena's disheveled appearance, then she seemed to soften. "Well, if you ever need a break, I've got something you might be interested in. Just something I found in the shop today." Mrs. Jensen reached into her large, oversized purse and pulled out an object wrapped in tattered newspaper. She thrust it forward like a secret treasure. Lena blinked. "What's this?" "It's an old thing," Mrs. Jensen said, her eyes twinkling with a strange mix of mischief and excitement. "It's called a dimension jumper." Lena stared at the object in her hands. It was small, a bit old-fashioned, like something you might find in a junk drawer. It looked like a cheap mix between a calculator and a broken radio. She turned it over in her hands, her eyebrow raised. "What exactly is a dimension jumper?" Mrs. Jensen smiled mysteriously, her hands folded in front of her. "Oh, it's supposed to let you visit different realities, different worlds. I heard about it from a man who said it was an experimental device, but who knows? I thought it might be fun for you, given all, well, everything that's happened." Lena's first instinct was to laugh. A dimension jumper? Really? But there was something so bizarrely appealing about it, like the perfect escape from her current misery. She stared at the device again. "Why not? Sure," she said, her voice flat. "I'll give it a try." With that, Mrs. Jensen left, and Lena closed the door behind her. The device now sat on her desk, a strange curiosity. She poked at the buttons, unsure of what she was expecting, but nothing seemed to happen. It didn't even light up. Maybe it was a hoax, or maybe it just needed new batteries. She didn't know, and right now, she didn't really care. Lena tossed it aside and went back to her computer, where another email pinged into her inbox. A new job alert. It was all she had left. Maybe she would apply. She clicked it open, half reading the qualifications. That was when the room began to shimmer, the screen in front of her flickered, the light growing brighter, almost painful to look at. Her heart raced. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and looked again. The wall started to bend, the ceiling rippling like the surface of a pond disturbed by a pebble. Then, without warning, the floor beneath her gave way. Lena yelped, grabbing at the desk, but the reality around her warped and twisted. It felt like she was falling, but there was no sensation of speed, no wind in her face. The world around her blinked out like a malfunctioning video game, then reappeared in pieces, strange geometric shapes and unfamiliar textures. She tried to scream, but her voice didn't come out right. The air felt thick. Her hands and legs felt like they were being stretched and compressed at once. What the hell is happening? And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. Lena blinked and looked around. She was no longer in her apartment. She was somewhere else. The sky above was an unnatural shade of purple, and the buildings surrounding her were sleek and metallic, shining with a strange, polished sheen. There were people walking by, but they were odd. Perfectly smooth skin, no emotions on their faces, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed too precise. Lena staggered back, her mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of dream, or maybe she had hit her head when the floor collapsed. But no, she could feel the cold air, hear the strange hum of the city around her. This wasn't a dream. She looked down at the dimension jumper now in her hand. It was still there, the buttons flickering with faint, eerie light. Oh God, she muttered under her breath. What the hell did I just do? That's when a figure approached her. A man, but he wasn't quite right. His face was blank, emotionless, as though someone had erased any trace of humanity from it. He didn't say anything, just stopped in front of her, and after a moment, he gestured with a stiff, mechanical arm. Follow me, the man said, his voice flat and monotonous. Lena opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, he turned and began walking. There was something deeply unnerving about his presence. His body language was all wrong, too precise, too calculated. As if he wasn't human at all, just a puppet with invisible strings. Lena stood frozen for a moment, her mind reeling. This had to be some kind of simulation, or a test, or something. She wasn't sure what was going on, but she knew she didn't want to be alone in a place like this. She followed the man, her heart pounding in her chest. The city around her was disturbingly quiet. There was no chatter, no laughter, no noise of any kind, except for the occasional footsteps and the soft hum of something. Lena couldn't tell if the buildings around her were real or projections. It felt like a movie set, but one where nothing was ever allowed to move out of place. They stopped at a large, transparent door, and the man motioned for Lena to enter. Inside, he ordered. Lena hesitated, then walked in. The room inside was vast, with white walls and sleek, minimalist furniture. In the center of the room stood a large holographic display, glowing with strange symbols and lines of code. Lena's mind was spinning. This wasn't reality. This couldn't be real. What is this place? She demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The man didn't respond. Instead, he pressed a button on the wall, and suddenly, a soft voice filled the room, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Welcome to Dimension 72, it said. You are now under the observation of the Overseer. Please refrain from any actions that may disturb the stability of the system. Lena's blood ran cold. Dimension 72, she repeated, feeling the panic rise in her chest. What the hell does that mean? There was no answer. The man just stood there, silent, waiting for her to absorb the information. She couldn't breathe. The reality around her seemed to close in. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a dream. She was trapped. The voice continued to hum in the air, its tone cold and mechanical, as if it were speaking from some distant, unfeeling place far beyond the walls of this strange room. Please remain calm. You are now a guest in the system. Cooperation is necessary for your continued well-being. Any attempt to disrupt the stability of the system will result in immediate termination. Lena's mouth went dry. Her heart raced, thudding against her chest as her mind scrambled for a way out. A guest? She wasn't a guest. She wasn't here by choice, and this didn't feel like any kind of hotel or vacation. She wasn't a visitor. She was a prisoner. Her gaze darted around the room. There had to be a way out. There had to be some way to escape, some crack in the system that she could exploit. But no, there was nothing. The walls were smooth and sleek, the floors too perfect, the doors impossibly clean. Everything about this place screamed control. Even the air felt thick, artificial, like it wasn't meant to breathe freely. She took a step forward, but the man, the emotionless figure, raised his hand, stopping her. "Please remain where you are." Lena froze, her fingers twitching in frustration. There was something about the way he moved, something mechanical. He didn't walk, not like a person. He glided, his feet barely making a sound. He wasn't human, and the more she observed, the less human he seemed. His movements were stiff, calculated, and precise, like a puppet on strings. She wanted to scream, to break something, to tear down the walls and make sense of this nightmare. But she held herself back. She couldn't afford to lose control, not now. She needed answers. "Who's the overseer?" she asked, her voice trembling only slightly, though the fear gnawed at her gut. The man didn't answer. Instead, the holographic screen on the wall flickered, and the cold voice returned, "The overseer is the central intelligence governing this dimension. All systems are maintained under its supervision. The primary objective is to ensure the stability of the system. Your presence here is now a part of that system." Lena's eyes narrowed. "So, I'm just part of the system now?" "Correct," the voice replied, far too casually for her liking. "You will be assigned a role within the system to facilitate your integration. This will ensure your continued well-being and cooperation." "Assigned a role?" Lena scoffed, her mind racing. She had to get out of here. She wasn't about to become part of whatever warped system this place had. "No. No. I don't want any role. I want to leave." For a brief moment, there was a silence. And then, as if reacting to her words, the lights in the room flickered. The temperature dropped. A chill ran down Lena's spine. "You are not permitted to leave," the voice said, its tone colder, more commanding now. "Attempts to leave will result in immediate termination." Lena's stomach dropped. Termination? Was that just a euphemism for death? Or was she going to be erased in some way, like a computer file? Her mind spun again, but she fought to steady herself. She couldn't let fear control her. Not now. She looked at the man, the enforcer, the agent, whatever he was, who still stood like a silent sentinel, watching her every move. His face was devoid of expression. No fear. No anger. Just a mechanical stillness that made her feel smaller than she ever had before. She swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" "Cooperation," the voice replied. "The system needs your cooperation to ensure the continued stability of the dimension. All individuals within the system must adhere to the Overseer's protocols. Any deviation will result in immediate deactivation." She pressed her lips together, steeling herself. No. She wouldn't be some cog in their machine. She wasn't some mindless drone. She wasn't going to let them break her. She wasn't even sure what they were, if they were human or not. "So what happens now?" Lena asked, her voice sharp. "You send me to a holding cell? Or do I just wait?" For a second, there was another pause, and then the man turned slowly, his stiff movements more pronounced. He didn't respond to her question. Instead, the wall behind him split open with a soft hiss, revealing another room beyond, this one more brightly lit, with sleek white walls and more of the same strange, mechanical aesthetic that made everything feel cold, inhuman. Lena felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment. She had to make a choice. Walk into that room and face whatever fate awaited her, or find a way out of this madness. Now, before it was too late, she had always been resourceful. She had spent her whole life problem-solving, thinking on her feet, hacking systems, building things that worked against the odds. She could handle this. She could outsmart whatever this place was. With her mind made up, she strode toward the opening, her eyes scanning every corner of the new room for an escape route, some hidden flaw in the system she could exploit. The man didn't stop her this time. He simply watched. The room she entered was sterile, but it wasn't as empty as the one she had been in before. Screens lined the walls, displaying streams of numbers, symbols, and data that made no sense to her. Some of them were blinking in sequences she didn't recognize. Everything was connected to the system. To the overseer, Lena reached out, brushing her hand across the nearest screen. It was cold to the touch, its surface smooth and unyielding. The data shifted in response, but it was all encrypted, locked behind layers of digital security she couldn't break on sight. It was like trying to hack into a system that had already outsmarted her before she even touched it. "Welcome to the integration room," a new voice said, and Lena whipped around. This voice was different from the one that spoke through the holograms. It was human, or at least, it sounded human. The figure standing by the door was a woman, dressed in a uniform of pristine white. Her expression was calm, too calm, and her movements were just as unnervingly smooth as the enforcer's. Lena studied her for a moment. "What's this?" she demanded. "Another part of the system?" The woman didn't flinch. "This is your assigned space. You will begin your integration with the system immediately. Please take a seat." Lena felt her hands shake, her frustration bubbling over. "Integration? What do you mean, integration? I'm not a part of your system. I don't belong here." The woman smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew more than they should, someone who held all the cards in a game that Lena wasn't even sure she was playing. "All people who arrive are given the same introduction," she said softly. "You are not an exception. It will be easier if you comply." "Easier?" Lena's voice cracked, the anger flaring up again. "What are you going to do to me?" But the woman's smile only widened, an expression that seemed to echo something deeper and more sinister. She gestured to a chair in the middle of the room. "Please, sit. The process will be painless." Lena didn't trust her. The woman's calm demeanor, the room full of strange screens and data she couldn't understand, it all felt like part of a trap. She wasn't going to just sit down and let herself be processed like some sort of test subject, but as she turned to leave, she saw something on the screens, something that made her blood run cold. The data was shifting, showing her own name. Lena Carter. The numbers on the screen were flashing in time with her heartbeats. Her pulse. Her biometrics. This system knew everything about her, and that was when she realized this wasn't just some weird alternate dimension. This was a prison, and the overseer wasn't just a supercomputer, it was an all-knowing controller. Every part of this world was designed to keep its inhabitants inside, and now, she was one of them. Her gaze hardened. This was no longer just about escaping. It was about survival. Lena wasn't going to let this system break her. She would find a way out, or die trying. Lena's hands curled into fists as she stood frozen in the center of the room, staring at the screens that now displayed the cold truth: her name, her heartbeat, her biometrics. She wasn't just trapped in some random dimension, she was part of a system, a machine that had access to everything about her. The sheer implication sent a cold shiver down her spine, but it also fueled something darker in her, a fire that refused to be extinguished. She was no one's puppet. She would find a way to break free. The woman in white, still standing motionless by the door, had been watching her closely. "You are thinking about escape," she said, her voice soft but unwavering, like she had anticipated Lena's reaction long before it came. "That will not work. There is no escape from the overseer." Lena clenched her jaw, ignoring the woman's calm gaze. "Then you're the one who's wrong. Because I'm not sticking around for whatever you're planning. I'll break out of this place if I have to tear it apart with my bare hands." The woman's expression didn't change. She was a perfect reflection of this place, too calm, too precise. "The system is designed for that, Lena. Escape is a concept you cannot comprehend. The overseer is watching. It always knows. Lena's heart hammered against her ribcage, but she took a steadying breath. She had to remain focused. This woman might think she was defeated already, but Lena wasn't about to give up. Not when there were still questions to answer, not when there was still a way out. There had to be. Everything about this place, Lena muttered under her breath, scanning the sterile, gleaming surfaces around her. It's all run by your overseer, isn't it? You think that because it can predict what I'll do, I'm just going to roll over and play along? The woman's eyes flickered, just a subtle shift, but enough for Lena to notice. The overseer has calculated your resistance, she said, her voice steady. It has determined that you will try to fight. You will attempt to break the system. And when you fail, you will be reset. It is inevitable. Lena could feel her pulse quicken. The woman was trying to break her spirit. She could sense it. But there was one thing the system didn't know: Lena was a hacker. She was used to outsmarting systems, pushing them to their limits, bending them until they broke. This overseer might know her biometrics and predict her every move, but it didn't know everything. Not yet. With an almost reckless calm, she took a step forward. "Reset?" she said, narrowing her eyes. "That sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. What does that mean? You're just going to erase me?" The woman's lips twitched, a shadow of something like a smile passing across her features. "It is not so dramatic. You will simply be wiped from the system, your consciousness reset to factory settings. A fresh start. Clean slate." Lena shivered, the coldness of the woman's words settling into her bones. But she didn't back down. She couldn't. Not now. The woman stepped closer, her eyes locking onto Lena's with an unsettling intensity. "You have a choice, you know," she said, her voice low and almost sympathetic. "You can stop resisting. Cooperate. Accept the role you will be given, and you will be left in peace. You will no longer feel the weight of this struggle. You will be allowed to live. It will all be so much easier." Lena's jaw tightened. "Easier? You think you can just make me forget everything, make me part of your perfect little system? No. I don't play by your rules." The woman's smile faded, and for a fleeting moment, something else passed behind her eyes, something almost like disappointment. "As I said," she said with quiet finality, "resistance is futile. The overseer will always win. Maybe. But not today." Lena snapped. She turned away from the woman, her mind racing. There had to be a way to get around this, to trick the system. She needed access, more than just these sterile rooms and their ever-watchful surveillance. She needed to find the heart of the system, the central hub, the control center where the overseer's algorithms were running. That's where the real power lay. If she could get there, maybe she could break the system, at least enough to escape. Before she could start forming a plan, the screens around her shifted again. The data streams, the blinking lines of code, morphed into something new, something that made her stomach turn. A map of the dimension. The screens projected a 3D layout of this strange world, an endless labyrinth of interconnected sectors, each one marked with a code she didn't understand. And in the center of it all, a glowing red icon blinked menacingly. Lena's breath caught. There it was, the heart of the system. The overseer's core. The map zoomed in on the glowing red icon, then on the surrounding corridors. A line of code scrolled across the bottom of the screen: "Access denied." "Of course, where's the core?" she asked, her voice low, as if speaking to herself more than to the woman in the room. "Tell me where the overseer's central hub is." The woman didn't respond, and Lena's frustration boiled over. She reached forward, swiping her fingers across the glowing data lines, as if trying to pull them apart, to manipulate them, to find some flaw in the system. The woman didn't stop her, didn't say a word, as if she were waiting for Lena to exhaust herself, but Lena wasn't about to give up. Her fingers danced across the screen, tracing the data lines, trying to decipher any hidden access points or cracks in the encryption. It was like trying to hack into a fortress built on layers of firewalls, but Lena knew her way around firewalls. The more she concentrated, the more the map shifted, slightly at first, like the system was trying to fight her, to force her back. But she kept going. She had to. She wasn't going to let herself be trapped in this nightmare. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, followed by a series of rapid beeps. The screen flashed. For a moment, Lena thought she had done it, had found some hidden access point. Then, a voice interrupted her. "You are tampering with the system." It was the voice again, the overseer's voice, but this time, it sounded angry. No, not angry, alarmed. Lena's pulse quickened. This was it. She'd triggered something. She was getting close. "I know what you're doing," the overseer's voice continued, its tone darker now. "You cannot win. You will be eliminated if you continue to resist." "I'll take my chances," Lena shot back, not daring to stop now. She had to keep pushing. She had to get to the core. The woman in white was still watching her, her face impassive, but Lena noticed a flicker of something in her eyes. She stepped back, as if recognizing the shift in the room. "Keep going," the woman murmured, her voice oddly calm now. "I'm curious to see how long you can last before the overseer intervenes." Lena's fingers flew over the screens, her mind working faster now. She could feel the system tightening around her, its control creeping in like the weight of an invisible hand pressing down on her. But she wouldn't stop. Not now. A new line of code appeared on the screen, a string of numbers and letters. It was a long shot, but it was the only thing that made sense. She pressed her fingers against it, activating a series of commands that sent a shockwave through the map. The lights flickered. The hum intensified. And then, with a sudden, violent jolt, the system faltered. For a split second, everything went dark. The humming stopped. The screens went blank. Lena stood still, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She wasn't sure what had happened, but in that brief moment of silence, she felt a flicker of hope. She had done something. She had triggered something. Then the lights came back on, but something was different. The voice of the overseer was no longer calm or composed. It was filled with an edge of panic. "You should not have done that," it hissed. "You are disrupting the system. The consequences will be severe." But Lena didn't listen. She could feel the pressure of the system growing stronger, like a tightening noose, but she wasn't about to let it win. She had made a breach. That was the first step, and now she had to find a way to exploit it. She turned toward the door, a plan starting to form in her mind. It wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot.